Motion for debate, the impact of economic and taxation policies. The Lord Elliott of Micklefell.
My Lords, I beg to move the motion standing in my name on the order paper. It's a privilege to lead today's debate on the impact of the government's economic and taxation policies on jobs, growth and prosperity. May I begin by noting an absent friend. I'm saddened that the coming budget will be the first one in 35 years that will take place without the thoughtful and perceptive comments of the late Noble Lord, Lord Desai. Like the Noble Lord the Minister, I studied at the London School of Economics in the 1990s and was taught by Lord Desai. I'm sure he would have spoken in this debate, and I know the whole House will greatly miss his contribution. At the heart of today's debate is the quest for economic growth, and today's growth figures are not encouraging, suggesting that the economy shrunk by 0.1% in September, and GDP per capita is flatlining or possibly falling since the figures are calculated using population estimates from 3 years ago in 2022. In the year 2000, when the Noble Lord the Minister was working as a special advisor in the Treasury, and I was a humble researcher working for the Noble Lord, Lord Kirkhope of Harrogate, economic growth was 3%, taxation was 33% of GDP, public spending was in surplus, and we were paying down the national debt. Earlier this year, I asked Sir Tony Blair what he ascribed that economic miracle to. He was quite clear it was down to the economic foundations laid down in the 1980s and his decision not to tinker with the fiscal plans laid out by the Noble Lord, Lord Clark of Nottingham. The story since 2007 has not been so rosy. Our average real GDP growth has been 1.3% per annum, with an average population growth of 0.7% a year. This equates to a measly rise in GDP per capita each year of just 0.6%. This means that living standards have stagnated for many. This means millions of personal recessions where people have become worse off year by year. In contrast, over the same period, the average American has gone from being 10% richer than the average Brit in 2007 to now being 40% richer. Is there hope around the corner? I fear there isn't. Recent World Economic League table projections of GDP per capita by the Centre for Economic Business Research paint a stark picture of where the UK is headed. In 2030, we'll be poorer per capita than Lithuania. In 2034, we'll be worse off than Poland. And in 2043, we'll be poorer than Turkey. That's the path we're on, and that's why today's debate is so important. Fundamentally, we all agree, on all sides of the House, on the need for economic growth and boosting living standards and prosperity. Kick-starting economic growth is one of this government's 5 missions. The Prime Minister put wealth creation at the heart of his manifesto. And the Chancellor says that economic growth is the government's #1 mission. But it's clear that the government lacks a comprehensive plan. I agreed with what a senior Labour figure said in a podcast recently, when they suggested the Chancellor needs to use the budget to present, and I quote, a growth plan for the long term, turning public services round and making them better. It's got to be a plan that sticks, which lasts, which doesn't unravel in the markets or in the Parliament or with the public in 48 hours. Those are the words of a previous colleague of the Minister, Labour's former Shadow Chancellor, Ed Balls, speaking on his Political Currency podcast on the 30th of October. I agree with him, and I hope the government addresses his challenge in the forthcoming budget. There's much I could say about a long-term plan for economic growth. Noble Lords who are interested in reading more about this might like to take a look at a new book I've written called Prosperity Through Growth, and I've placed a copy in the library. The economic brains behind the book were my co-authors Dr. Arthur B. Laffer and Doug McWilliams, and the geopolitical content came from my noble friend Lord Hinsey, who sadly has a long-standing speaking engagement in Australia, so I'd ask you to pass on his apologies. For this debate, I will limit myself to three key elements of a growth plan, where I believe there's mainstream agreement. These are abundant energy, abundant employment, and abundant enterprise. I will take these in turn. Abundant energy is a necessary prerequisite of economic growth, so we need the cost of energy to come down. The World Bank summarised the literature by saying, affordable, accessible energy is at the heart of development, driving job creation, growth, and shared prosperity. Our energy is immensely expensive compared to our competitors. Wholesale energy costs in the UK are double costs in most European countries, and almost half of each bill is down to policy costs. The government knows that mainstream opinion is shifting on this issue. The Prime Minister acknowledged in his remarks at the COP30 summit that, and I quote, consensus is gone on climate change policy. Sir Tony Blair told us for Prosperity Through Growth that net zero should be delayed as other countries are not following our lead. Even previous major advocates from outside politics seem to be responding to changed circumstances. Bill Gates remarked in October that, for the vast majority of people, climate change will not be the only or even the biggest threat to their lives and welfare. The biggest problems are poverty and disease, just as they always have been. Other senior figures in the Labour movement have also expressed scepticism about pursuing net zero by 2050. The Nobel Lord Glassman will be giving a lecture the week after next on why it's good to be warm, energy as a common good. Sharon Graham, General Secretary of Unite, has suggested that the Energy Secretary has been, and I quote, completely irresponsible in his approach to energy security and jobs in the oil and gas sector. I agree with her, and I believe the Prime Minister also agrees with her, because he tried to move Ed Miliband in September's reshuffle. I wish him better luck next time, because it's essential for economic growth that we focus on lower energy bills rather than net zero alone. A second essential element for accelerated growth is abundant employment. The importance of jobs and work is something I speak about regularly in your Lordship's House. I continue to commend the government for their ambition to bring the employment rate up from 75% to 80%. And since they've been elected, they've succeeded in increasing the employment rate by 0.3%, putting them on track to hit their target in 2048. At the same time, unemployment is up from 4.2% to 5%. The number of universal credit claimants who have no requirement to work is up from 2.9 million in October 2024 to 4 million in October 2025, a 39% rise in the space of a year. The number of job vacancies is down from 870,000 to 723,000. The number of new jobs which need to be created by the private sector to achieve 80% employment is now 1.4 million rather than 1.2 million. Crucially, the Employment Rights Bill reduces job creation, which is why the Treasury is rightly trying to water it down. A Tony Blair Institute report last week said that day one rights risk, and I quote, eroding business confidence to hire. The Resolution Foundation argues that day one rights offer, and I quote, little obvious gain for workers and has the potential to inhibit hiring. And even the Prime Minister's chief economic advisor, the Nobel lady Baroness Shafiq, expressed significant concerns about the bill, saying, if you've got lots of people on benefits who are hoping to get into the labour market, then you need to give employers some flexibility to take risks on those people. It's time to make employing people more flexible and affordable for businesses and bring about abundant employment. This isn't solely about economic growth. It's about giving people their first step on the employment ladder. No jobs, no ladders of opportunity. The final factor we need for economic growth is abundant enterprise, and taxation is a crucial driver of that. In 1998, Gordon Brown introduced taper relief for capital gains tax. This scheme incentivised long-term investment and had no lifetime limit on holding assets, with a long-term CGT rate of just 10%. Today, the picture's very different. From next April, the rate will be 18% up to £1 million and 24% beyond that. We need to acknowledge the impact that these and other changes to incentives have on our economy. As we see the rise of remote working, the mobility of people must be a key consideration when making any tax changes. This is already happening, with 16,500 high net worth individuals, many of them entrepreneurs and investors, expected to leave the UK in this year alone. And it includes members of your Lordship's House. The Minister's former colleague in Downing Street, the noble Lord Carter of Barnes, recently left the UK to go to Dubai. On another podcast recently, a senior Labour figure suggested that the Chancellor undid the damage done by the changes to the non-dom rules and moved to an Italian-style system for taxing wealthy individuals. And I quote, "What they should think about doing is a kind of flat tax deal, because that's what the Italians have done. They're basically saying, look, you come here, you pay €300,000 a year, and you keep the rest of it, but we want you to be here." I think Labour could get away with that, say that to non-doms, $500,000, that's all you pay, end of quote. I don't often agree with what I hear on the rest is politics, but on this issue, I think Alistair Campbell is spot on. We do need to change the incentives to attract more entrepreneurs to the UK rather than drive them away. And we need to ensure that young entrepreneurs set up their businesses here rather than go overseas. Many other people within the Labour Party also agree with this sentiment. Sir Tony Blair acknowledged, when speaking to us for our book, that taxes are immensely high by historic standards, and he even suggested a 40% top rate of income tax, saying it was probably too high in today's highly mobile world. And the noble Lord Mendelssohn, expressed it perfectly in a recent report for Onward. A small group of wealthy individuals pay a significant proportion of the tax we rely on. I do not agree with some colleagues that we should wave goodbye to the wealthy. We should be doing whatever we can to welcome them back and new investors, entrepreneurs and house spenders to our shores. And he's right. If we're to have abundant enterprise, a key element of any serious growth plan, the Treasury needs to start attracting people back to the UK. Last week we heard the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, say that she's willing to take tough but necessary choices and do the right thing. This is welcome, but raising income tax is not the right tough choice. Chasing limited liability partnerships away from the UK is not the right tough choice. Letting the welfare bill continue to escalate is not the right tough choice. Instead, the Chancellor should look at the policy options I've highlighted today, which are supported by mainstream opinion, including respected voices in the Labour Party. In his closing statement, will the noble Lord the Minister respond to Ed Balls and outline what the government's long-term economic plan is? On energy, does the Minister agree with Bill Gates, Unite and the noble Lord Glassman that we should focus more on jobs and poverty and less on net zero by 2050? On employment, does the Minister agree with the Resolution Foundation, the Tony Blair Institute and the noble lady Bana Shafiq that the Employment Rights Bill will make it less likely that businesses take on riskier hires? And on enterprise, does the Minister agree with Alistair Campbell, Sir Tony Blair and the noble Lord Mendelssohn, and Lord Carter of Barnes for that matter, that we need to do more to attract entrepreneurs and investors to come to the UK rather than chasing them away? This month's budget will have a critical impact on our economic standing in 20 years' time. Will we maintain our position? Will we perhaps even improve it? Or will we fall behind Turkey? Britain's decline is not inevitable. The path to prosperity is open to us. It's time to take it. It's time to make Britain rich again. I beg to move.